Yesterday was the anniversary of Charles Brandon, Duke of Suffolk, being sent to France in 1515 on King Henry VIII's orders. His mission was an important one. He was to escort the King's younger sister, 18-year-old Mary, back home. Mary had been married to 52-year-old King Louis XII of France, but had recently been widowed after just less than 3 months of marriage. Suffolk, who was around 30 years of age, was an important man and the King's best friend. So who better to look after Mary? Well, anyone really. Let me tell you a bit about Charles Brandon, Duke of Suffolk's love life. Back in 1506, Suffolk had become betrothed to Anne Brown, one of Queen Katherine of Aragon's ladies, after getting her pregnant. However, he soon abandoned her after he realised that he could make a better match with her widowed aunt, Dame Margaret Mortimer. Can you imagine what that must have been like for Anne? Her reputation was in tatters and her fiancé had left her. And poor Margaret! Suffolk had married her solely for her land, and once he'd taken it and sold it, he decided to get the marriage annulled so that he could go back to Anne. The annulment was agreed, and he married Anne, the mother of his daughter, also named Anne, in 1508. Anne gave Suffolk another daughter, Mary, in 1510, but died soon after. Suffolk may then have stayed single for a few years, but he certainly didn't stay celibate, fathering 3 illegitimate children, a son and 2 daughters. And in 1514, he purchased the wardship of Elizabeth Grey, daughter and heiress of the late John Grey, 2nd Viscount Lisle. Elizabeth was only 8 years old, but Suffolk became betrothed to the orphan, planning to marry her later. He's not quite the man I'd choose to escort my 18-year-old sister home from France. After all, Mary was renowned for her beauty and was a wealthy woman and the Dowager Queen of France. And it may be that her head had already been turned by Suffolk. She would have seen him many times at court, and he'd attended her wedding celebrations. Soon after his arrival in France, Mary decided that Suffolk was her choice of husband. She wrote to her brother reminding him of a promise that he'd made to her before her marriage to Louis XII, a promise that if the king died, that she'd be able to marry of her choice, saying that she wanted to marry where my mind is. And if the king decided to break his promise to her, well, she'd enter a convent so that he'd lose control of her dower. What spirit that young woman had! It appears that Mary and Suffolk married in secret in February 1515, just a few weeks after Suffolk's arrival in France. According to Suffolk, he'd had no choice in the matter. He just had to rescue Mary. He wrote to Wolsey saying, when he came to Paris, he heard many things which put him and the Queen in great fear, and the Queen would never let me be in rest till I had granted her to be married, and so, to be plain with you, I have married her. The secret marriage was followed by an official marriage in France the following month. Henry VIII was furious when he heard the news. Historian Stephen Gunn believes that Henry was angry, though perhaps not surprised, as Suffolk had discussed with him a potential marriage match. He just didn't expect them to do it in France before they'd got his full approval. Although he allowed them to marry again properly at Greenwich that May, he made them pay for the embarrassment they'd caused him. Gunn writes that Mary had to surrender her jewels and plates and half of her dowry, and Suffolk had to give up the wardship of his ex-fiancée Elizabeth Grey, Lady Lisle. Not only that, the couple had to agree to pay the king a further £24,000. Although this didn't need to be paid immediately, it was to be taken in instalments over 12 years from the profits Mary made on her dower lands in France. Mary and Suffolk were married for 18 years, their marriage only ending on Mary's death in June 1533. Their marriage appears to have been happy and successful and resulted in 4 children, 2 sons and 2 daughters, although their sons died young. Suffolk, being Suffolk, didn't grieve for long after Mary's death. In 1528, he'd purchased the wardship of Katherine Willoughby, daughter of William Willoughby, 11th Baron Willoughby, and she'd inherited land in Lincolnshire and East Anglia. Suffolk had been planning to marry the girl off to his son and heir, Henry, 1st Earl of Lincoln. But Mary's death meant that Suffolk could marry Katherine and take her estates for himself. He married the 14-year-old Katherine in September 1533, and the boy who'd been meant to marry her, young Henry, died a few months later. Despite their age difference, Suffolk was about 49, their marriage appears to have been successful. Katherine gave birth to a son, Henry, in 1535, and another son, Charles, in 1551. The marriage lasted until Suffolk's death in August 1545. Sadly, the sons died of sweating sickness in July 1551. Katherine went on to marry her gentleman usher, Richard Bertie, in 1552, having 2 children by him, Susan and Peregrine. I've not seen any evidence that Suffolk strayed during his marriage to Mary Tudor, but then I'm not sure that Henry VIII would have been very happy if his friend had cheated on his sister. And there also doesn't seem to be any hint of him cheating on Katherine. If he did, he was discreet. Even if Suffolk looked like Henry Cavill, which I'm not sure he did, and had money, influence and the king's ear, I'm not sure he's a man I'd want a friend or relative to be involved with. He does appear to have been a bit of a cad, and a man who really didn't keep his promises. He left his pregnant fiancée to marry her aunt, then he abandoned her to go back to the fiancé, then he married his friend's sister without telling his friend, who just happened to be the King of England, breaking his betrothal with an heiress. Then, when his wife died, he nabbed his son's fiancée and married her. I think cad sums him up. What do you think?